I have a mixed experience with this film. On the one hand, it introduced me to the music of The Doors, and turned me into a big fan of theirs. But on the other hand, the surviving members of The Doors have all voiced distaste for the way Stone handled their story. People will argue for days on how accurate this film is to The Doors' lives, but there's no denying that they themselves are dissatisfied with how Stone portrayed them. They've claimed that Stone apparently got a lot of interesting details from them, and then made up his own facts for the movie. Like, say, the scene where Jim locks Pamela in a closet and sets it on fire. But maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here. You know, in all honesty, Jim Morrison comes off as an asshole in this movie. Just like a lot of people in the 60s counterculture gave it a bad name because they were just spoiled children acting out, Morrison comes off as an overly pretentious drug addict who was lucky to have poetic talent and a good singing voice. As one of the films in Stone's golden age, it's probably the one I like least. But despite its flaws, there is a lot to be liked about this film. Val Kilmer's portrayal of Jim Morrison is legendary, and even the Doors themselves acknowledge that Kilmer was brilliant. He didn't just portray Jim Morrison, he became Jim Morrison, singing voice and all. The other Doors members are also well played. Keyboardist Ray Manzarek is played by Kyle MacLachlan, drummer John Densmore is played by Kevin Dillon, and guitarist Robbie Krieger is played by Frank Whaley. Meg Ryan plays Jim Morrison's wife, Pamela Courson, while Kathleen Quinlan plays Patricia Keneally, a pagan worshipper who Morrison had an affair with. Michael Madsen and Billy Idol both have supporting roles, and we also get a truly hilarious cameo by Crispin Glover as the legendary Andy Warhol, who gives Morrison a present that I'm sure many people would wish to own. If I had to name the best qualities of this film, I'd pick the performances, as well as the soundtrack and the way the concerts are filmed. Stone completely captures the feel of what a Doors concert must have been like, even if it's supposedly really exaggerated. I think the best way to watch this movie is just to forget about all the outraged objections that the real people have raised in the years since its release. But even ignoring the blatant fiction, the movie does play out with an irregular pace even for Stone's standards. There are so many unhappy scenes as people try to deal with Morrison's frequent mood swings and his addictions. There aren't many scenes that really justify why these people worked together for so many years. Half the time Morrison is completely gone on drugs, and the other half of the time he's so far up his own butt that it's impossible to reason with him. Now granted, I'm sure Morrison was far from a saint, but for a guy who claims to be fascinated and inspired by Morrison, Stone doesn't seem to think very highly of him. But be that as it may, the movie works as an experience, a trip to the time of flowers and anti-war protesters and LSD, a time where the Doors were established as a band that understood the counterculture and played right into it. Morrison was almost less of a person and more of an event that lasted for too brief a moment in time, as his early death indicates. I don't know what he would have thought of Stone's movie, but then again, he might not have been bothered to even see it. Now, I should say, if for no other reason than to compensate the Doors fans listening to this video, that I really do like their music. And the movie did do that right. It definitely got me interested in them. And to be fair, I guess that's one way you can really judge the success of this movie. If it's trying to sell us the music, it definitely works. It just does a lesser job selling the man behind the music. As a final note, The Doors was released in 1991, a year that marked the second time in his career that Stone released two movies in the same year. The other film he released in 1991 is perhaps his most famous film, and also his best film.